Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and let our minds drift back to a time in American history that feels almost impossible to comprehend, a period when fear and paranoia gripped entire communities, leading to accusations that would shatter lives. We're talking about the miserable lives of women accused of witchcraft. Forget everything you think you know about justice and due process. For countless women in colonial America, simply being different, outspoken, or unlucky could condemn them to an unimaginable nightmare. It's a journey into a dark corner of our past, where the very air seemed to hum with unseen dangers, and the line between belief and hysteria was tragically blurred. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in for tonight's journey, feel free to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Whether that's a quiet evening in a suburban home in Ohio, or a late night in a bustling apartment in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself, now, living in a small, tightly knit Puritan village in colonial New England, perhaps Ipswich, Massachusetts, in the late 17th century. The forest presses in close, a dark and mysterious presence. Winter is long and harsh. Harvests are unpredictable, and disease can sweep through a family with terrifying speed. Life is hard, fraught with uncertainty, and deeply shaped by a rigid religious doctrine that sees the hand of God in every blessing and the influence of the devil in every misfortune. It's in this anxious atmosphere that whispers in the dark begin to circulate, the insidious currents of fear, suspicion, and the first seed of accusation. It's like living in a perpetual state of high alert, where every creak of the floorboards could be a sign, and every shadow holds a sinister possibility. You can practically feel the tension in the air, a cold dread that chills you to the bone. The foundations of these witch hunts were laid in a fertile ground of anxiety. The colonists faced immense challenges: unfamiliar terrain, harsh weather, hostile Native American tribes, though often provoked by colonial expansion, and diseases that claimed lives indiscriminately. Their deeply held Puritan faith provided a framework for understanding these hardships, but it also painted a universe where the devil was a very real, active force, constantly striving to corrupt souls and undermine God's kingdom. Every crop failure, every stillborn child, every unexplained illness could be interpreted not as natural misfortune, but as the direct malevolent work of Satan, acting through his human agents, witches. This worldview cultivated a profound fear of the unseen. The invisible world of spirits, angels, and demons was considered as real, if not more real, than the physical world. Witches, therefore, were not just superstitious folklore, they were real, dangerous enemies within the community. People who had willingly covenanted with the devil in exchange for supernatural power. This made finding and eradicating them a sacred duty, a holy war against an insidious enemy. A common historical truth is that the European witch hunts, which influenced colonial American witch trials, were fueled by deeply held religious beliefs, societal anxieties stemming from economic hardship, disease, and political instability, and a prevailing worldview that attributed misfortune to malevolent, supernatural forces, particularly the devil and his human agents. These fears created a fertile ground for suspicion and accusation. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological and sociological factors that led to the escalating hysteria of specific witch trials, and whether underlying social tensions or even environmental factors played a larger role than purely religious fervor in driving the accusations. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about these whispers in the dark And the initial first seed of suspicion is the widespread belief in cunning folk, or white witches, in many colonial communities. Individuals who practiced folk magic for healing, finding lost objects, or fortune-telling, and who, despite serving community needs, could easily be relabeled as malevolent black witches once fear and suspicion escalated. Imagine your neighbor. Goody Smith is known for her special herbal teas that soothe fevers, or her knack for finding lost livestock by reading patterns in the dirt. She's respected, even sought after, for her practical knowledge and comforting presence. But then a child falls ill, crops fail, or a dispute arises, and suddenly, Goody Smith's unusual skills, once seen as benevolent, can be reinterpreted. The herbs become charms. Her readings become divination by evil spirits, and her cunning becomes sinister. The very qualities that made her useful could, with a shift in the communal mindset, mark her for destruction. It's like having a local handyman everyone trusts, until someone decides his tools look a bit too much like instruments of torture. The suspicion often began subtly. Perhaps an older woman, living alone and outspoken, had a sharp tongue or wasn't quite fitting into the strict societal norms. Maybe she was a midwife whose patients sometimes had difficult births, or a healer whose remedies didn't always work, a terrifying contrast to the often powerful, if unpalatable, herbal brews of ancient China, which we learned about in Chapter 3. Any misfortune befalling a neighbor, particularly if there had been a previous argument or perceived slight, could lead to a retrospective interpretation. Ah, that illness came shortly after I argued with Martha. She must have bewitched me. This retroactive assignment of blame was a powerful engine of accusation. In these close-knit communities, privacy was minimal, and gossip was rampant. A disgruntled neighbor, a child's inexplicable ailment, a cow falling sick, all could become grist for the mill of suspicion. These initial whispers were often informal, exchanged around the communal well or after Sunday service, but they built a cumulative sense of unease around certain individuals. People would begin to watch, to look for signs, to confirm their growing fears. The religious fervor of the era also played a direct role in nurturing this fear. Sermons often emphasized the omnipresent struggle between good and evil, painting vivid pictures of the devil's temptations and the dangers of straying from piety. This constant reinforcement created an atmosphere where the supernatural was not only believed but expected to manifest, making the leap from misfortune to malevolent witchcraft a very small one. The line between being a devout Christian and being labeled a witch was terrifyingly thin, often defined by the interpretations of a few powerful individuals. When a community faced a period of particular stress, perhaps a new minister struggling to unite his flock, a series of unexplained illnesses, or internal political tensions, these dormant suspicions could ignite. What might have been dismissed as unfortunate circumstances suddenly became evidence of supernatural malice. The collective anxiety found a convenient target, a scapegoat onto whom all misfortunes could be projected. And once that first seed of accusation was planted, watered by fear and fertilized by suspicion, it could grow into a monstrous, unstoppable force, consuming lives and shattering communities. So, while the thought of living in a world where whispers in the dark could condemn you, where fear of the unseen fueled relentless suspicion, and where the smallest misfortune could plant the first seed of a witchcraft accusation, might make you shiver. It was a terrifying reality for your ancient ancestor in colonial America. This era reminds us of the fragility of justice in the face of mass hysteria, proving that for millennia, human anxieties, coupled with rigid belief systems, could create a crucible of terror that consumed innocent lives. leaving us truly grateful for the legal protections, scientific understanding, and an emphasis on individual rights that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of whispers in the dark. Your ancient ancestor, living in a colonial village, would have endured an atmosphere saturated with fear and suspicion, where even common misfortunes could plant the first seed of a witchcraft accusation, fueled by pervasive belief in the devil's work. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish reason and due process today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by collective paranoia and the terrifying power of rumor, leaving us truly grateful for the rule of law and critical thinking that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts, let's gently return to that anxious colonial village, where whispers in the dark could quickly blossom into paralyzing fear, cultivating a deep suspicion that allowed the first seed of a witchcraft accusation to take root. If we've just explored the societal anxieties and religious fervor that created such fertile ground for paranoia, tonight we'll witness how those initial fears escalated into overt hostility, the accuser's gaze, neighbors, narratives, and twisted truths. You might think of legal proceedings as objective, but for your ancient ancestor, a woman suddenly under scrutiny, the path to being labeled a witch often began with the chilling accuser's gaze, a turning of ordinary neighbors into hostile witnesses, weaving damning narratives built on deeply twisted truths. Imagine yourself, now, as Martha, a woman in that very village, perhaps in Andover, Massachusetts, in 1692. The initial whispers have hardened into open speculation. You've had a disagreement with your neighbor, Goody Perkins, over a stray pig. Now, Goody Perkins's child suddenly falls ill with a strange fever, or her butter won't churn, or her cow gives sour milk. Her eyes, once familiar, now hold a cold, unwavering accuser's gaze, fixed on you. The misfortune is too convenient, too specific, and so the formal accusations begin, driven by personal grievances, interpreted through a lens of pervasive fear, and solidified into terrifying narratives that stretch and contort the truth until it becomes utterly unrecognizable. It's like a quiet argument over a fence turning into a full-blown federal investigation, where every single minor misunderstanding from the past is suddenly evidence of a heinous crime. Accusations of witchcraft rarely sprang from nowhere. They often simmered within the crucible of a close-knit, often strained community. Petty quarrels, long-standing feuds, property disputes, or even simple envy could become the igniting spark. Perhaps you, Martha, were wealthier than your neighbor, or your crops were more bountiful, or you simply didn't attend church as regularly as some believed was proper. These small social frictions, magnified by the era's intense religious beliefs and collective anxieties, a callback to the fear of Chapter 1, could easily morph into damning evidence of a supernatural alliance. The accusers were frequently ordinary neighbors, people you had known for years, with whom you had shared meals or helped with harvests. This made the betrayal even more profound. A child might complain of being pricked or tormented by an unseen force, and when pressed by adults, would name a specific individual, often someone with whom the family had a grievance. An adult might recount a sudden illness or misfortune that occurred after an argument with the accused, interpreting it as a direct act of maleficium or harmful magic. These weren't necessarily malicious lies from the outset. In many cases, the accusers genuinely believed they were being afflicted by witchcraft. The power of suggestion, mass hysteria, and the intense pressure to identify the source of their suffering could lead them to genuinely experience symptoms they attributed to witchcraft. A common historical truth is that accusations of witchcraft in colonial America frequently arose from pre-existing social tensions, personal grievances, or property disputes within tight-knit communities, often initiated by neighbors or family members who genuinely believed they were afflicted by the accused's maleficium. These accusations were then interpreted through a prevalent theological framework that attributed misfortune to diabolical influence. Historians still widely debate the extent to which psychological factors like mass hysteria, suggestibility, and genuine physical ailments contributed to the accuser's symptoms, and how much economic or social motivations consciously drove specific accusations in various witch trials. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about the accuser's gaze and the fabrication of twisted truths is the practice of spectral evidence, where victims claimed to see the accused's spirit or specter tormenting them, even when the physical person was elsewhere, a form of testimony that was highly influential in convictions despite its unverifiable nature, and later became a point of major contention. Imagine a young girl, convulsing on the floor, claiming to see Martha's invisible specter pinching her, even though Martha herself is at home, miles away. This spectral evidence was considered incredibly powerful because it was believed that only a witch could send their spirit to torment others. The accused had no way to defend against such an invisible assailant. How do you prove your spirit wasn't somewhere else? This kind of testimony created an impossible dilemma for the accused, as their very denial could be interpreted as further proof of their demonic deception. It's like being accused of robbing a bank because someone saw your ghost doing it, and your only defense is to say, "But I was at home," which just makes them think you're a really good ghost. The narratives constructed by the accusers became chillingly similar across different cases, almost as if a template for demonic affliction existed. Victims would describe symptoms like choking, pinching, biting, or being pricked by unseen needles. They would suffer fits, convulsions, or inexplicable pains. These experiences, though perhaps stemming from genuine medical conditions, psychological stress, or even attention-seeking behavior, were almost universally attributed to the malevolent acts of a witch. The more vivid and dramatic the narrative, the more convincing it often seemed to the fearful community and the authorities. The process of accusation often began informally, with complaints being brought to local magistrates or ministers. These initial investigations would involve interrogating the accusers and victims, listening to their harrowing narratives. If the complaints seemed credible, which, in a climate of pervasive belief in witchcraft, they often did, the accused would be formally apprehended, leading to public examinations and, eventually, trials. What made these truths twisted was the complete inversion of logic and justice. Anything could be used as evidence against you. If you confessed, you confirmed your guilt. If you denied, you were resisting God's will and the truth, proving your demonic stubbornness. If you were pious, you were just hiding your true wicked nature. If you cursed your accusers, a completely natural human reaction, it was proof of your malevolent power. Even mundane events could be reinterpreted. A pot boiling over, or a child crying, suddenly became evidence of a spell. It was a no-win situation, a dizzying spiral of irrationality where the accused was trapped in a logic built on fear. The social dynamics of accusation were also crucial. Accusers often gained immediate authority and attention, particularly young women or children whose afflictions were seen as direct evidence of Satan's work. This newfound power could be intoxicating, perpetuating the cycle of naming and blaming. Those who questioned the accusers risked becoming targets themselves. So, while the idea of the accuser's gaze turning your everyday neighbors into instruments of your downfall, weaving terrifying narratives built on profoundly twisted truths, might send shivers down your spine. It was the chilling reality for women accused of witchcraft in colonial America. This era reminds us of the devastating power of collective fear and the fragility of justice in the face of mass hysteria, proving that for millennia, human anxieties, coupled with rigid belief systems, could distort reality and consume innocent lives, leaving us truly grateful for the legal protections, critical thinking, and emphasis on verifiable evidence that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the accuser's gaze. Your ancient ancestor, if accused, would have faced neighbors weaving twisted narratives, genuine or not, about spectral torments, where any misfortune could become damning evidence of their supernatural alliance. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish objective evidence and due process today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by communal paranoia and the terrifying power of subjective accusation, leaving us truly grateful for the rule of law and the presumption of innocence that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts, let's gently return to that strained colonial village, where the accuser's gaze could turn familiar neighbors into hostile witnesses, meticulously weaving terrifying narratives built on profoundly twisted truths. If we've just explored how fear and interpersonal friction ignited accusations, tonight we'll witness the horrifying formal process that sealed the fate of the accused trials by terror, ordeals, confessions, and cruel tests. You might think of a trial as a search for justice, but for your ancient ancestor accused of witchcraft, it was a descent into an illogical nightmare, fraught with terrifying ordeals, often coerced confessions, and utterly cruel tests designed to prove guilt rather than innocence, making every moment of the trial by terror a harrowing struggle for survival. Imagine yourself, now, as Bridget Bishop, a woman accused in Salem, Massachusetts, in June of 1692. The initial accusations have led to your arrest, and you are brought before a panel of magistrates, often in a crowded, stifling meeting house, filled with the murmurs of curious and fearful onlookers. This is no ordinary court of law as you understand it. This is a trial by terror, where the rules of evidence are twisted and common sense has fled. You are about to face a series of terrifying ordeals designed to strip away your defenses, to extract a confession at any cost, and to subject you to cruel tests that leave no room for escape. It's like being trapped in a twisted game show where all the rules are rigged against you, and the grand prize is an agonizing death. The legal system of colonial New England, while based on English common law, was profoundly shaped by Puritan religious beliefs. Witchcraft was not just a crime, it was considered a heinous sin, a direct pact with the devil, and therefore an offense against God himself. This theological underpinning meant that the goal of a trial was not merely to ascertain guilt through verifiable evidence, but to uncover the truth of a spiritual transgression, to force a confession, and ultimately to purge the community of evil. Formal complaints would be made, often by the afflicted individuals or their families, to local magistrates. These magistrates, often respected members of the community and deeply religious men, would conduct initial examinations. These examinations were less about objective investigation and more about interrogation. The accused would be questioned relentlessly, sometimes for hours, often without legal representation, and always under immense psychological pressure. Any inconsistencies in their answers, any signs of anger or defiance, could be interpreted as further proof of their demonic influence. A common historical truth is that colonial American witch trials often featured a reversal of typical legal principles, with the burden of proof effectively shifted to the accused, and methods like the use of spectral evidence, coerced confessions, and physical examinations for witches' marks serving as primary means of conviction rather than verifiable evidence. This created a system profoundly biased against the accused. Historians still widely debate the extent to which judges and magistrates genuinely believed in the validity of spectral evidence. and how much societal pressure or personal ambition influenced their rulings during the height of the witch hysteria. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about these trials by terror and the use of cruel tests is the touch test, where an accused witch was forced to touch their alleged victim, with the belief that if the victim's torments or fits ceased upon touch, it was definitive proof that the accused was indeed their tormentor and a witch. Imagine Bridget Bishop, chained, being brought close to a young girl writhing on the floor, seemingly afflicted by an unseen force. The magistrates instruct Bridget to touch the girl. If, upon Bridget's touch, the girl's convulsions abruptly stop, it is considered irrefutable evidence that Bridget's malevolent spirit was indeed tormenting the child, and her physical touch had temporarily withdrawn the torment. This bizarre, almost theatrical demonstration was incredibly powerful in convincing the fearful onlookers and magistrates of the accused's guilt, trapping the accused in an impossible bind. It's like proving someone is a fire-breathing dragon because when they burp, a distant candle flickers. One of the most terrifying aspects of these trials was the reliance on ordeals, ancient methods of determining guilt or innocence based on divine intervention. While the notorious ducking stool, or swimming a witch, where the accused was thrown into water to see if they floated or sank. Floating being a sign of guilt was less common in New England than in Europe. Other forms of divine judgment were present. The aforementioned touch test was one such ordeal. Another was the constant search for a witch's mark or devil's mark, which we'll delve into more deeply in Chapter 4. Believed to be a physical spot where the devil had sucked the witch's blood, this often involved humiliating and intrusive physical examinations. The pressure to elicit a confession was immense. A confession was considered the ultimate proof of guilt, but also a path to repentance and, sometimes, a way for the accused to save their own lives, though not always their reputation or freedom. The accused would be subjected to grueling interrogations, often deprived of sleep and food, bombarded with theological arguments about the nature of their sin, and urged to confess to save their souls. They were told that only by confessing and naming other witches could they possibly find mercy. Imagine being utterly exhausted, terrified, and told that the only way to escape this nightmare is to admit to something you didn't do, and implicate your friends or neighbors in the process. This psychological torment often led to false confessions. Desperate to end the suffering, terrified of execution, or genuinely believing they might have unknowingly fallen prey to the devil's influence, remember the power of the communal narrative from Chapter 2. Some accused individuals would break and confess. These confessions, however, almost always required the accused to name others they had seen with the devil, or who were also witches. This created a terrible chain reaction, expanding the circle of accusations and perpetuating the hysteria. It's like a chain letter where every link is a new accusation, and the only way to stop it is to add your own name and a few more. The cruel tests extended beyond physical examinations. Accused witches might be asked to recite the Lord's Prayer perfectly, with the belief that a true witch would be unable to do so without stumbling. Their responses to questions about their interactions with the afflicted were meticulously scrutinized, often with leading questions designed to trap them. Any perceived hesitation, any tremor in their voice, could be interpreted as a sign of guilt. For those who maintained their innocence, the outlook was grim. Without a confession, the evidence against them often relied on flimsy testimonies, spectral evidence, or circumstantial misfortune. Yet, the fervent belief in the reality of witchcraft meant that denial was often seen as further proof of their depravity and their stubborn alliance with the devil. The legal process offered little recourse. There was no appeal process as we understand it, and juries were often swayed by the overwhelming fear and the dramatic performances of the afflicted. So, while the idea of facing a trial by terror with its arbitrary ordeals, relentless pressure for confessions, and utterly cruel tests designed to guarantee a conviction, might fill you with dread. It was the harrowing reality for countless women accused of witchcraft in colonial America. This era reminds us of the profound dangers when legal systems abandon reason for superstition, proving that for millennia, the pursuit of justice can be tragically perverted by fear, leading to unimaginable suffering and the systematic destruction of innocent lives, leaving us truly grateful for the principles of due process, the presumption of innocence, and the rigorous standards of evidence that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of trials by terror. Your ancient ancestor, if accused, would have endured terrifying ordeals like the touch test, facing relentless pressure for coerced confessions through cruel tests, all designed to prove guilt rather than innocence. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish due process and fair trials today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by communal hysteria and the terrifying perversion of justice, leaving us truly grateful for the rule of law, critical thinking, and the protection of individual rights that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts. Let's gently return to that harrowing colonial courtroom, where trials by terror subjected the accused to arbitrary ordeals, relentless pressure for confessions, and utterly cruel tests, turning justice into a perversion. If we've just explored the terrifying judicial process, tonight we'll delve into one of the most chilling and humiliating aspects of these accusations, the devil's mark: bodies, proof, and dehumanizing searches. You might think of a medical examination as a private, dignified process, but for your ancient ancestor accused of witchcraft, it was a grotesque intrusion, a desperate and dehumanizing search across their very bodies for a physical sign the devil's mark believed to be irrefutable proof of their infernal pact. Imagine yourself, now, as Susanna Martin, an older woman known for her sharp wit and independent spirit, accused in Salem Village in 1692. After enduring the initial interrogations and the terrifying trials by terror, a painful callback to Chapter 3, you are subjected to another, even more invasive, procedure. You are led to a private room, perhaps in the home of a local magistrate or even the jail, where a panel of women, often matrons or midwives, awaits. Their purpose is chillingly clear: to conduct a thorough and dehumanizing search of your entire body for any abnormality, any blemish, any mole or wart that could be construed as the devil's mark, the physical proof of your covenant with Satan. It's like being subjected to a strip search, not for contraband, but for an invisible tattoo that only the devil can truly see. Yet everyone is convinced they can find it. The concept of the devil's mark, also sometimes called a witch's mark or witch's teat, was a pervasive belief in both European and American witch hunts. It was believed to be a physical spot on the witch's body where the devil had either touched them during their pact, or where a familiar spirit, a demonic assistant, often in the form of an animal like a cat, dog, or bird fed by sucking the witch's blood. The mark itself could be anything: a mole, a birthmark, a wart, a scar, or even a natural skin imperfection. The key was that it was supposedly insensitive to pain and would not bleed when pricked. The search for this mark was considered a crucial step in proving guilt. Alongside confessions and spectral evidence, remember those terrifying twisted truths from Chapter 2. It was tangible, physical evidence in an era where much of the proof was intangible and supernatural. The logic was simple: if a witch made a pact with the devil, there must be a physical sign of that bond on their body. The process involved meticulously stripping the accused and examining every inch of their skin, including private areas. This was inherently a dehumanizing search, stripping away their dignity and privacy. Imagine the shame and violation of such an ordeal, performed by strangers, all while facing the specter of death. For many, this examination alone was a profound trauma. A common historical truth is that the search for the devil's mark, or witch's teat, was a widely accepted method of proving guilt in witch trials, involving intrusive physical examinations of the accused's body for any blemish believed to be insensitive to pain or a feeding spot for a demonic familiar. This practice was considered tangible evidence of a pact with the devil. Historians still widely debate the psychological impact of these dehumanizing searches on the accused, and how much the intense scrutiny and expectation of finding a mark contributed to the perceived discovery of these proofs by the searchers. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the dehumanizing searches for the devil's mark is the employment of witch prickers, individuals, often men specifically hired to probe the accused's body with needles, pins, or bodkins to find insensitive spots, making the search for proof even more torturous and adding a layer of professionalized cruelty to the process. Imagine being held down, your body exposed, while a witch pricker methodically probes your skin with a long needle. The pricker would typically start at the extremities and work their way inward, paying close attention to moles, warts, or any suspicious blemishes. If they pricked a spot and you showed no reaction, no pain, no bleeding, it was declared a devil's mark, irrefutable proof of your guilt. Of course, many of these prickers were charlatans, using retractable needles or simply pricking areas of the body that are naturally less sensitive, like calluses or old scars, to produce the desired evidence. This made the search not just humiliating, but potentially dangerous. A brutal test designed to confirm a preconceived notion of guilt. It's like having someone try to prove you're an alien by poking you with a stick until you don't flinch. Once a suspicious mark was found, it would be subjected to further scrutiny. It might be repeatedly pricked to ensure it was truly insensitive to pain and did not bleed. Sometimes, the suspected mark would be observed for a period to see if it swelled, changed color, or if a familiar, like a fly or spider, seemed to approach it, as this was believed to indicate the familiar feeding. The implications of finding such a mark were catastrophic. It was considered compelling proof of a pact with the devil, making a conviction almost inevitable. Even if the accused denied everything, the presence of the mark was thought to override all protests, as it was believed the devil himself had made the mark and rendered the spot insensible. The psychological toll on the accused during these dehumanizing searches must have been immense. Beyond the physical invasion, there was the profound humiliation, the feeling of being utterly stripped bare, both literally and metaphorically. To have one's own body turned against them, every natural imperfection twisted into a sign of evil, was a deep violation of self. It cemented their status as an outcast, a vessel for the devil's work, deserving of the harshest punishment. These physical examinations stand in stark contrast to any modern medical understanding. Instead of looking for symptoms of illness or injury as doctors did, even rudimentarily, with the pulse and prognosis in Chapter 2, the searchers were actively seeking proof of an invisible, supernatural crime. They were not healers, but inquisitors, using pseudoscientific methods to confirm a predetermined narrative of demonic possession. The persistence of the belief in the devil's mark highlights the deep-seated fears and superstitious beliefs that permeated colonial society. It provided a tangible, albeit fabricated, justification for the widespread hysteria, giving physical form to an invisible threat. It truly sucked to have your body become a crime scene, your own skin used as evidence against you in a trial by terror. So, while the idea of a dehumanizing search for the devil's mark on your body twisting natural imperfections into sinister proof might make you recoil. It was a terrifying reality for women accused of witchcraft in colonial America. This era reminds us of the profound dangers when fear and superstition invade the most intimate spaces, proving that for millennia, the human body could be turned into a battleground for irrational beliefs, leading to unspeakable violations and the systematic destruction of innocence, leaving us truly grateful for the principles of bodily autonomy, medical ethics, and evidence-based science that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the devil's mark. Your ancient ancestor, if accused, would have endured dehumanizing searches of their body, where any blemish could be twisted into physical proof of their infernal pact by witch prickers probing for insensitive spots. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish bodily autonomy and scientific rigor today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by invasive and humiliating examinations, leaving us truly grateful for medical ethics and critical thinking that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts, let's gently return to that horrifying chamber, where dehumanizing searches for the devil's mark turned the accused's very bodies into twisted proof, stripping them of dignity. If we've just explored the physical violations, tonight we'll delve into the darkest and most brutal means of extracting truth, torture's grip, pain, lies, and forced narratives. You might think of a confession as a voluntary admission, but for your ancient ancestor, a woman facing accusations of witchcraft, it was often the terrifying result of relentless pain, a desperate attempt to end the suffering through lies, and the construction of forced narratives designed not to reveal truth, but to satisfy her tormentors, all under torture's grip. Imagine yourself, now, as Mary Eastie, a respected matriarch from Topsfield, Massachusetts, accused of witchcraft in 1692. You have endured the public accusations, the terrifying interrogations, and the humiliating body search as a grim callback to Chapter 4. You have vehemently maintained your innocence, clinging to your piety and good name. But your steadfast denial is now seen not as courage, but as stubbornness, as further proof of your alliance with the devil. The authorities, convinced you are hiding the truth, decide more. Persuasive methods are needed. You are about to enter the terrifying realm of torture's grip, where unimaginable pain becomes the tool, where truth is irrelevant, and where lies become the only path to escape, forcing you to construct a forced narrative that may condemn others. It's like being caught in a nightmarish game of broken telephone, but every misheard word is beaten out of you, and the game only ends when you say exactly what they want to hear. While colonial New England courts did not officially sanction the use of the horrific rack or thumbscrews typical of European inquisitions, psychological and indirect physical torture were certainly employed, especially during interrogations. The line between coercive interrogation and outright torture was incredibly blurry, often non-existent from a modern perspective. The goal was always the same: to break the accused and extract a confession, often along with the names of other alleged witches. The primary forms of torture in New England involved severe psychological duress and physical deprivation. Accused individuals, many of whom were elderly or frail, would be subjected to grueling, lengthy interrogations, sometimes lasting for days. They would be denied sleep, food, and water. They might be chained in uncomfortable positions, or kept in dark, cold, unsanitary cells where the conditions alone were a form of torment. Imagine being interrogated for 24 hours straight, constantly accused, constantly urged to confess, while growing weaker and more disoriented with every passing moment. Your mind, exhausted and vulnerable, begins to fray. A common historical truth is that while overt, officially sanctioned physical torture instruments like the rack were rarely used in colonial American witch trials, psychological coercion, sleep deprivation, starvation, and harsh imprisonment conditions were common tactics during interrogations, designed to break the accused and elicit confessions, often leading to false admissions and the implication of others. Historians still widely debate the precise legal distinctions drawn between torture and coercive interrogation by colonial authorities, and how much these methods were a conscious application of established European practices versus an organic development from religious fervor and a desperate search for answers. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about torture's grip and the construction of forced narratives is the practice of watching or waking the accused, where individuals were kept awake for extended periods, often under constant scrutiny, in the belief that the devil would not allow his servants to confess while under his influence, thus using sleep deprivation as a means to weaken their will and force a confession. Imagine being chained to a bench, unable to lie down, with guards constantly watching you, poking you awake if your eyelids drooped. This wasn't just about deprivation. It was rooted in a theological belief that if the witch could not sleep, their demonic familiar, a grim callback to the devil's mark from chapter 4, also couldn't sleep and would eventually abandon them, or that the devil himself would leave their side, allowing them to confess. This insidious form of pain wasn't always physical blows, but a relentless assault on the mind, eroding sanity and resolve until the accused was desperate for release, leading them to fabricate any lies that might bring an end to the torment. It's like trying to win a staring contest against a demon, where the prize for losing is your soul, and the only way to blink is to confess. Under this intense psychological and physical pressure, the accused would often reach a breaking point. The desire to end the suffering, the desperate hope for mercy, or the complete disorientation caused by the deprivation would lead them to utter lies, confessions of witchcraft that were entirely fabricated. They would admit to things they had not done, describe encounters with the devil they had never had, and implicate others in their fabricated narrative. These forced narratives were not random. They often followed a terrifying script dictated by their interrogators' expectations. The accused might describe signing the devil's book, flying through the air on a broomstick, or attending witch meetings. They would name others they had seen with the devil, or who were also witches, often under direct prompting from their accusers or magistrates. This was the horrific engine of escalation, as each new confession, no matter how coerced, would lead to more arrests, more interrogations, and more forced narratives, fueling the hysteria and expanding the circle of victims. The cruelty was amplified by the lack of any legal recourse. There was no lawyer to advise them to remain silent, no judge to rule against coerced testimony. The magistrates genuinely believed they were doing God's work, extracting the truth from agents of Satan. The accused's pleas of innocence were dismissed as further evidence of their demonic cunning. For those who continued to deny, the alternative was often execution. For those who confessed, the outcome was still dire. While a confession might spare them from hanging, some believed it indicated repentance, it often led to lifelong imprisonment, social ostracization, and the confiscation of their property. Their reputation was irrevocably shattered, and their lives, even if spared, were ruined. This choice between death and a life of utter misery under torture's grip was a horrifying dilemma. The psychological impact of undergoing such an ordeal would be profound and lasting. The trauma of the interrogations, the forced recantation of truth, and the betrayal of oneself would haunt survivors, if any existed. For the rest of their days, the scars of the forced narrative would remain, even if the lies were later recanted. It truly sucked to be caught in a system where the truth was irrelevant, and your survival depended on saying what your tormentors wanted to hear. So, while the idea of torture's grip using relentless pain to extract lies and construct forced narratives might make you shudder, it was a terrifying reality for women accused of witchcraft in colonial America. This era reminds us of the profound dangers when authority abandons humanity for fanaticism, proving that for millennia, the pursuit of truth through brutal coercion can shatter minds, pervert justice, and systematically destroy human dignity, leaving us truly grateful for the legal protections against self-incrimination, the prohibition of torture, and the emphasis on voluntary verifiable testimony that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of torture's grip. Your ancient ancestor, if accused, would have endured relentless pain from sleep deprivation and psychological torment, leading to forced narratives, where lies became their only escape, implicating others in their desperate confessions. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish human rights and ethical legal practices today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by brutal coercion and the terrifying perversion of justice, leaving us truly grateful for the protections against torture and the right to fair process that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts, let's gently return to that grim chamber, where torture's grip twisted minds with relentless pain, forcing desperate lies into forced narratives that condemn the innocent. If we've just explored the brutal realities of coerced confessions, tonight we'll delve into the most elusive and terrifying form of evidence used against the accused spectral sightings: visions, voices, and invisible tormentors. You might think of evidence as tangible, but for your ancient ancestor, a woman on trial for witchcraft, her fate could be sealed by the chilling testimony of others claiming to see her spirit, her spectral sighting, tormenting them through unseen visions and tormenting voices, tormented by utterly invisible tormentors. Imagine yourself, now, as Martha Corey, a well-regarded member of the community in Salem Village, Massachusetts, in 1692. You have staunchly denied the accusations, refusing to confess even under the immense psychological pressure a defiant stand against torture's grip from Chapter 5. But your fate may not rest on physical evidence or even a coerced confession. Instead, it rests on the chilling testimony of the afflicted girls and young women who claim to be tormented by your spirit. They writhe in the courtroom, experiencing fits and convulsions, claiming to see your spectral sighting your ethereal form tormenting them with invisible pinches, suffocating them, or whispering tempting, diabolical voices into their ears. These are your invisible tormentors, and their supposed presence, unseen by anyone else, becomes the most powerful and damning proof against you. It's like being accused of a crime by someone who claims they saw your ghost commit it, and your only defense is to say, "But I was home in bed," a plea that only makes them believe you're a powerful witch. Spectral evidence was perhaps the most controversial and certainly the most bewildering aspect of the witch trials in colonial New England. Particularly in Salem, it was the testimony of victims who claimed to see the accused witch's specter or spirit afflicting them, even when the accused's physical body was elsewhere. This belief stemmed from the Puritan understanding that the devil could send the specter of a witch to torment others, and only the afflicted victims could perceive these attacks. When the afflicted individuals, typically young women and girls, began to exhibit symptoms, convulsions, screaming, contorting their bodies, claiming to be bitten or pricked by unseen forces, their performances were taken as direct evidence of a witch's malevolence. When asked who was tormenting them, they would name specific individuals, claiming to see the specter of that person causing their distress. This testimony, while entirely subjective and unverifiable by anyone else in the room, was initially given immense weight by the magistrates and ministers. A common historical truth is that spectral evidence, the testimony of accusers claiming to be tormented by the invisible spirits of the accused, played a pivotal and highly controversial role in many colonial American witch trials, particularly in Salem. Its acceptance as valid proof made conviction almost impossible to refute for the accused, despite its subjective and unverifiable nature, and later contributed significantly to the trial's eventual collapse. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological and sociological factors that led to the phenomenon of spectral affliction, ranging from genuine psychosomatic illness and mass hysteria to conscious fabrication or manipulation, and how much the intense religious belief in demonic influence genuinely shaped the accuser's experiences. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about spectral sightings and the power of invisible tormentors is how some accused individuals, when confronted with the afflicted persons, would inadvertently cause the victims to go into fits merely by looking at them or making a gesture, further proving their guilt in the eyes of the court and the terrified onlookers, reinforcing the belief that their very gaze held malevolent power. Imagine you, Martha, are brought into the courtroom, trying to look composed despite your fear. As your eyes sweep across the room, an afflicted girl suddenly screams and falls into a convulsion, pointing at you. Perhaps you merely frowned in frustration, or your hand twitched from nervousness. But to the onlookers, this was seen as definitive proof your evil specter, emanating from your physical presence, was actively tormenting the child. Your very being, your unintentional glance could be twisted into a weapon. It's like being accused of having laser eyes, and every time you blink, someone in the room screams about being burned, all because they expect it to happen. The visions and voices described by the afflicted were chillingly vivid. They would claim to see the accused witch's specter tempting them to sign the devil's book, or threatening them with violence if they refused to join Satan's ranks. They would hear disembodied voices whispering blasphemies or urging them to commit evil deeds. These detailed accounts, often delivered with dramatic flair and convincing emotional displays, held immense sway over the fearful magistrates and jurors, who believed they were witnessing a direct struggle between good and evil. The problem, of course, was that there was no way for the accused to disprove spectral evidence. How do you prove that your spirit wasn't somewhere else, inflicting pain? Your denial was often seen as further proof of your cunning and alliance with the devil, as only a powerful witch would be able to resist confessing despite such divine proof. It was a trap, a legal cul-de-sac where innocence became synonymous with guilt. The use of spectral evidence also created a perverse incentive for the accusers. Their dramatic performances garnered attention, sympathy, and power within the community. For some, it might have been a subconscious release of adolescent anxieties or social pressures. For others, it might have been a conscious manipulation to settle scores or gain notoriety. Whatever the underlying psychological reasons, the validity placed on their spectral sightings fueled the hysteria and widened the net of accusations. The increasing reliance on spectral evidence eventually became a major point of contention and ultimately contributed to the collapse of the witch trials. As more and more respectable individuals, including ministers and their family members, were accused based solely on spectral testimony, doubts began to surface. Prominent figures like Cotton Mather and Increase Mather, while initially supporting the trials, later questioned the sole reliance on spectral evidence, arguing that the devil could assume the shape of an innocent person to deceive the afflicted. This theological shift opened the door for skepticism, the emotional and psychological toll on the accused, knowing their fate rested on the subjective visions and claims of invisible tormentors, must have been immense. It was an assault not just on their physical well-being, but on their very identity and sanity. To be judged guilty based on something no one else could see, to have your very essence deemed evil by spectral forces, was a profound and terrifying injustice. It truly sucked to be convicted by the ghosts of your accusers. So, while the idea of your fate resting on spectral sightings, where visions and voices of invisible tormentors served as damning evidence, might chill you to the bone, it was a terrifying reality for women accused of witchcraft in colonial America. This era reminds us of the profound dangers when legal systems abandon reason for subjective experiences, proving that for millennia, the human mind, susceptible to fear and suggestion, could become an unwitting weapon in a system that destroyed innocent lives, leaving us truly grateful for the objective standards of evidence, the presumption of innocence, and the rigorous scientific inquiry that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of spectral sightings. Your ancient ancestor, if accused, would have faced damning testimony from accusers claiming visions and tormenting voices from her invisible specter, a terrifying form of proof that sealed many fates. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish verifiable evidence and rational thought today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by subjective claims and mass hysteria, leaving us truly grateful for the scientific method and legal protections that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch trials, let's gently return to that harrowing colonial courtroom, where spectral sightings and the claims of invisible tormentors could seal a person's fate, proving that visions and voices alone were enough to condemn. If we've just explored the terrifying subjective nature of evidence, tonight we'll witness the ultimate brutal culmination of these trials, the gallows shadow, condemnation, execution, and public spectacle. You might think of a death sentence as a somber, private affair, but for your ancient ancestor, a woman condemned as a witch, her final moments were a horrifying public spectacle, a chilling condemnation by her community, ending in a brutal execution under the inescapable gallows shadow. Imagine yourself, now, as Sarah Good, a poor, marginalized woman from Salem in Massachusetts in July of 1692. Despite your pleas of innocence, despite the lack of any tangible evidence beyond the fits and accusations of the afflicted, a grim echo of the twisted truths from Chapter 2. The jury has delivered its verdict guilty. The judge pronounces your sentence death by hanging. You are now living under the gallows shadow, an inescapable fate that looms over you with chilling finality. Your journey, from suspicion to interrogation, from humiliating searches, a sickening callback, to the devil's mark in Chapter 4, to the brutal trials, a torturous memory of trials by terror in Chapter 3, now culminates in a horrifying public spectacle, a final, brutal execution, designed to both punish you and terrify the onlookers. It's like being cast in a tragic play, where you are the unwilling star, and the only curtain call is the end of your life. Once a verdict of guilty was rendered in a witch trial, the condemnation was swift and absolute. Witchcraft was a capital crime, meaning it was punishable by death. There was no appeal process as we understand it today, and the condemned were often given little time to prepare for their fate. They might be returned to the prison, where conditions were often appalling, to await the final walk. The execution itself was typically carried out by hanging. While burning at the stake was common in Europe for witchcraft, New England adhered to English law, which prescribed hanging for the crime. This was not a private affair. It was a deliberate public spectacle, designed to serve as a stark warning to the community and to provide a visible purging of evil. A common historical truth is that in colonial American witch trials, conviction for witchcraft invariably led to a death sentence, with execution typically carried out by hanging rather than burning at the stake, as was more common in parts of Europe. These executions were highly publicized events, intended to publicly purge the community of evil and reinforce religious and social order. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of these public executions on the colonial populace, and how much they reinforced or ultimately undermined the legitimacy of the legal and religious authorities in the long run. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the gallows shadow and the horror of the public spectacle is the practice of ministers or magistrates offering final fervent prayers and exhortations at the gallows itself, often urging the condemned to confess their sins even in their last moments, turning the execution into a final public theatrical attempt at spiritual salvation or moral vindication for the authorities. Imagine standing on the scaffold, the noose already around your neck, and rather than a moment of quiet reflection, a stern minister stands before the crowd, delivering a powerful sermon. He isn't speaking words of comfort to you, the condemned. Instead, he's preaching to the terrified masses, reminding them of the devil's power, using your impending death as a vivid lesson. He might even make one last fervent plea to you to confess, to give glory to God by admitting your alliance with Satan. This turned your execution not just into a physical death, but a final, relentless assault on your soul. A public shaming and a last-ditch effort to extract a confession that would justify all the terror that led to this moment. It's like being forced to perform a final, agonizing monologue on stage, with the entire town as your audience, and the play ends with your demise. The condemned would be led from the jail to the site of execution, often a prominent hill overlooking the town, like Gallows Hill in Salem. They might be bound, and the walk itself was part of the punishment, a final humiliation. Crowds would gather, drawn by a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and a sense of communal righteousness. Women, men, and even children would be present, bearing witness to what was considered a necessary act of divine justice. The scene at the gallows was grim. The scaffold, often a simple wooden structure, would stand stark against the sky. The hangman, sometimes a local official or simply an appointed individual, would perform his duty. The act of hanging itself was brutal and not always instantaneous, sometimes resulting in a slow, agonizing death by strangulation rather than a quick neck break. The final moments would be filled with terror, pain, and despair. For the community, this public spectacle served multiple purposes. It was a tangible expression of their fight against Satan, a visible victory over the forces of evil. It was a reaffirmation of their rigid religious beliefs and the authority of their leaders. It was also a terrifying warning: stray from piety, harbor resentment, or simply be accused, and this could be your fate. The sight of a neighbor, once familiar, now lifeless, swaying from the rope, would sear itself into the collective memory, perpetuating the fear that fed the witch hunt. The bodies of the executed were often not given proper Christian burials. They might be cut down and unceremoniously buried in unmarked graves, further emphasizing their status as outcasts and agents of the devil. For families, this meant a final indignity, unable to mourn their loved ones with traditional rites, leaving them in a perpetual state of unresolved grief. The condemnation was not just of the individual, but also of their reputation, their family name, and often their surviving family members, a painful foreshadowing of Chapter 8. The accusation and execution left an indelible stain, marking families for generations. The collective memory of the trials and executions would linger, a dark chapter etched into the history of the towns involved. The experience of being condemned and executed as a witch truly sucked. It was a complete stripping away of dignity, humanity, and hope, culminating in a brutal, public death, all based on a terrifying web of fear, twisted logic, and baseless accusations. It reminds us of the fragility of human rights when mass hysteria takes hold. So, while the idea of living under the gallows' shadow, facing a public condemnation and brutal execution as a horrifying public spectacle, might fill you with profound dread. It was the chilling reality for countless women accused of witchcraft in colonial America. This era reminds us of the devastating consequences when fear overrides compassion and justice, proving that, for millennia, the human capacity for cruelty, fueled by religious fervor and societal paranoia, could lead to unimaginable suffering and the systematic extermination of innocence, leaving us truly grateful for the legal protections against cruel and unusual punishment, the right to a fair trial, and the emphasis on human dignity that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the gallows' shadow. Your ancient ancestor, if condemned, would have faced public condemnation and a brutal execution, a horrifying public spectacle where ministers exhorted them even at the last moment. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish human dignity and fair legal processes today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by public shaming and a terrifying perversion of justice, leaving us truly grateful for the ethical and humane standards that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts. Let's gently return to that bleak landscape under the gallows' shadow, where condemnation and execution were terrifying public spectacles, the brutal end for those accused of witchcraft. If we've just witnessed the horrifying fate of the accused, tonight we'll explore the lingering, agonizing aftermath for those left behind, children of the accused, orphans, outcasts, and stained legacies. You might think that once the trial was over, the pain would end, but for your ancient ancestor, a child whose mother or grandmother was condemned as a witch, life became an unimaginable struggle, turning them into instant orphans, social outcasts, forever burdened by a stained legacy that reverberated through generations. Imagine yourself now as a little Dorothy Good, the 5-year-old daughter of Sarah Good, accused and executed in Salem, Massachusetts. In 1692, a tragic follow-up to the fate of her mother in Chapter 7. You witnessed your mother's agonizing journey through accusation, interrogation, and public humiliation. You might have even been present when she was led away under the gallows' shadow. Now, she is gone. You are an orphan. Your father might be imprisoned, or also accused, or simply unable to care for you. You are one of the children of the accused, instantly transformed into an outcast in a community that now views your very existence through the lens of your parents' perceived evil. Your family name, once perhaps unremarkable, is now burdened by a stained legacy, a mark of infamy that will follow you for the rest of your life. It's like being forced to wear a scarlet letter not for your own sin, but for one that was falsely attributed to your parent, an invisible brand that everyone can somehow see. The ripple effect of a witchcraft accusation and conviction extended far beyond the accused individual. Entire families were torn apart, their lives irrevocably shattered. When a mother or a grandmother was accused, her children, especially if they were young, immediately became vulnerable. Their primary caregiver was gone, either imprisoned, executed, or fled. This created instant orphans, left without parental guidance or protection in a society that offered very little in the way of social welfare. These children often faced extreme hardship. Without a parent to provide for them, they could be left destitute, reliant on the meager charity of reluctant neighbors, or forced into indentured servitude. a harsh form of labor where they were bound to a master for a set number of years. Imagine a child, perhaps only 7 or 8 years old, suddenly forced to work long hours in someone else's home or fields, simply because their mother was deemed a witch. Their innocence was irrelevant. The perceived sin of their parent overshadowed everything. A common historical truth is that the children of individuals accused and convicted of witchcraft in colonial America faced severe consequences, often becoming orphans or social outcasts, struggling with poverty, forced servitude, and a stained legacy that negatively impacted their lives and reputations for generations. This extended punishment highlights the communal and familial nature of accusations in Puritan society. Historians still widely debate the long-term psychological impact on these children, and how many were able to escape the social stigma and integrate successfully into later colonial society. Given the pervasive belief in the inheritance of sin, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the children of the accused and their status as outcasts is the legal and social implications for their inheritance and property rights. Not only were families financially ruined by court fees and imprisonment, but in some cases, the convicted witch's property could be seized by the authorities, further impoverishing the children and ensuring their stained legacy extended to material destitution. Imagine your mother. Martha is accused. Her small plot of land, her meager household possessions, everything she owns, is used to cover the costs of her imprisonment, her trial, and her eventual execution. If there's anything left, it might be seized by the local authorities, leaving you, her child, with absolutely nothing. This wasn't just about losing a parent. It was about the complete erasure of your family's economic stability, ensuring that the stained legacy was a material burden as well as a social one. It's like being evicted from your home, not because you couldn't pay rent, but because your parent was wrongly accused of a crime. And now everything they owned is gone, leaving you with nothing but shame. Beyond the immediate material hardship, the most crushing burden these children carried was their status as social outcasts. In tightly knit, highly religious communities, the sin of witchcraft was believed to be so heinous that it often stained the entire family. Children of convicted witches were viewed with suspicion, fear, and even disgust. They might be shunned by their peers, subjected to whispers and pointed fingers, and treated with coldness by adults who feared contamination by the devil's influence. Their stained legacy extended into every aspect of their lives. Marriage prospects would be severely limited, as respectable families would be loath to associate with a lineage touched by witchcraft. Opportunities for apprenticeships or skilled labor might be denied. Even in death, the stigma could follow them. Their parents might have been denied proper burial, a cruel detail from Chapter 7, and the shadow of their alleged demonic pact would linger over their family name for generations. The psychological impact on these children of the accused must have been immense. Growing up knowing that your parent was publicly condemned as an agent of the devil, responsible for tormenting neighbors or bringing misfortune, would instill deep trauma and shame. They might internalize the guilt, believing that there was something inherently wrong or evil about their family, even if they never understood the accusations. They might struggle with their faith, unable to reconcile the loving God preached in sermons with the horrific fate inflicted upon their innocent parent. Some historians argue that the very act of accusing children like the aforementioned Dorothy Good, who was herself imprisoned at the age of 5 with her mother, was a calculated tactic. By implicating children, the authorities underscored the pervasive nature of Satan's influence, suggesting that the devil would even corrupt the youngest and most innocent. For the children themselves, this meant not only parental loss, but also the terrifying experience of imprisonment and interrogation, further contributing to their trauma. The few who survived this ordeal and attempted to reclaim their family names in later years often had to fight against enormous odds. It took generations for some families to shed the stigma. And even then, the memory of the trials lingered, a dark shadow over their lineage. The injustice inflicted upon their parents continued to haunt them. It truly sucked to inherit a curse of infamy rather than a legacy of love. So, while the idea of becoming an orphan, a social outcast, burdened by a stained legacy simply because your parent was one of the children of the accused, might break your heart, it was the chilling reality for countless innocent individuals in colonial America. This era reminds us of the profound injustice when societal paranoia extends its cruel reach beyond the accused, proving that, for millennia, collective fear could shatter families, consigning innocent children to lives of misery and shame, leaving us truly grateful for the legal protections for families, the social safety nets, and the emphasis on individual innocence that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality of the children of the accused, your ancient ancestor. If one of them might have become an orphan, an outcast burdened by a stained legacy, their family's property seized, all due to a parent's false conviction. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish family protections and individual innocence today, for centuries, countless lives were defined by inherited shame and systemic injustice, leaving us truly grateful for social welfare and the presumption of innocence that define our lives today, far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts. Let's gently return to that fractured colonial society, where the children of the accused became instant orphans and social outcasts, forever marked by a stained legacy inherited from their condemned parents. If we've just explored the human cost of these accusations on the individual and family, tonight we'll broaden our view to examine the wider, more insidious consequences that reverberated through the very fabric of the community beyond the pyre, property, power, and community's scars. You might think that once the accused were gone, the community would find peace. But for your ancient ancestor, living in the aftermath of these witch trials, the air was thick with mistrust. Property was seized, lines of power were redrawn, and deep, unhealed community scars lingered for generations. Imagine yourself, now, as a surviving resident of Andover, Massachusetts, in the immediate aftermath of the witch hysteria of 1692-1693. The executions have ceased, the courts have adjourned, and the chilling grip of mass paranoia has finally begun to loosen. But the silence that follows is not one of peace. It's the quiet of profound trauma, the physical signs of suffering, like the gallows shadow, a grim echo from Chapter 7, may have faded, but the economic, social, and psychological wounds run deep, extending far beyond the pyre. You see vacant homes where families once lived, their property now contested or seized. You feel the subtle, yet pervasive, shifts in local power dynamics as some families rise while others fall, and everywhere you sense the pervasive, unhealed community scars, invisible yet palpable, a constant reminder of the horrific events that ripped your world apart. It's like watching a sudden, devastating wildfire sweep through a forest, leaving behind not just charred trees, but a permanently altered landscape where nothing quite grows the same way again. The direct economic impact of the witch trials was substantial, particularly for the accused and their families. Those imprisoned faced immense fees for their upkeep in jail, for court proceedings, and for their execution if convicted. These fees, whether legitimate or exploitative, often utterly bankrupt the accused and their families. Their assets, land, livestock, household goods would be seized or sold off to cover these exorbitant costs. This was not a small sum. For many, It represented their entire life savings or their only means of livelihood. The economic ruin of accused families guaranteed that their children, as we learned in Chapter 8, would become impoverished orphans and outcasts. Furthermore, for those who owned significant property, accusations of witchcraft could become a convenient tool for unscrupulous individuals to gain land or wealth. While not the primary motivator in all cases, the potential for economic gain certainly played a role in some accusations, or at least provided a powerful incentive for accusers and authorities to continue the proceedings. The acquisition of property from the condemned, whether through legitimate fines or more dubious means, created a perverse economic incentive within the system, leaving a bitter taste in the mouths of those who saw their neighbors profit from tragedy. A common historical truth is that the witch trials in colonial New England had significant socio-economic consequences, including the financial ruination of accused families through exorbitant court fees and imprisonment costs, and in some cases the seizure or forced sale of their property. This led to widespread poverty and dislocation for the survivors and their children, contributing to lasting community scars. Historians still widely debate the extent to which economic motivations consciously drove specific accusations or the prosecution of certain individuals, and whether the transfer of property was a primary driver or a secondary consequence of the trials. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about community scars and the redrawing of power is the subtle, long-term shifts in ecclesiastical and secular authority, as the trials exposed fault lines between ministers and magistrates, and the eventual public recantations and apologies by some involved sought to re-legitimize institutions that had been deeply compromised by the hysteria, yet never fully erased the lingering distrust in their leadership. Imagine the ministers, once revered spiritual guides, who fervently supported the trials and believed every spectral sighting a chilling echo from Chapter 6, or the magistrates who presided over the trials by terror a painful memory from Chapter 3, sending innocent people to the gallows. Once the hysteria subsided and the grievous errors became clear, their authority was severely undermined. Some, like Judge Samuel Sewall, later made public apologies for their roles, seeking forgiveness. But this didn't instantly heal the rift. The power structures were shaken. A deep skepticism towards authority figures emerged, and it took generations for communities to fully trust their leaders again, leaving indelible community scars of moral compromise. It's like watching your favorite sports team suddenly start cheating, and even after they apologize, you can never quite look at them the same way again, knowing their integrity was compromised. The social fabric of the communities was irrevocably torn. Friendships were shattered, family bonds frayed, and deep divisions emerged between accusers, accused, and those who dared to question the proceedings. Neighbors turned against neighbors, a painful callback to the accuser's gaze in Chapter 2. The very concept of trust, fundamental to small, interdependent settlements, was corroded. Those who survived the accusations, or whose family members were condemned, faced immense social ostracization. Even if later exonerated, the stigma often lingered for decades, sometimes centuries. Imagine trying to live your life in a small town where everyone remembers that your mother was called a witch, where every misfortune in your family might still be whispered about as a sign of lingering evil. The psychological impact on the surviving community was also profound. The collective trauma of the mass hysteria, the memory of innocent people being condemned and executed, and the realization of their own complicity, whether through silence, accusation, or belief, left deep community scars. Guilt, regret, and a pervasive sense of uneasiness would settle over the towns. Some individuals who had played active roles as accusers later recanted their testimonies, expressing remorse as the full horror of what they had done became clear. This slow, painful process of reckoning, of coming to terms with collective delusion and cruelty, was a long road to healing that, arguably, was never fully completed. The witch trials also had a significant impact on legal precedent and religious thought in colonial America. The excesses of the trials, particularly the reliance on spectral evidence, led to reforms in the judicial system, emphasizing more tangible evidence and stricter rules of procedure. The role of ministers in legal proceedings was reevaluated, leading to a greater separation of church and state in later colonial law. The power dynamics within the community shifted as the extreme religious fervor began to be tempered by a greater emphasis on reason and individual rights, lessons learned through bitter experience. So, while the thought of your community bearing deep scars, where property was seized and lines of power were forever altered, extending far beyond the pyre of the executed, might fill you with despair. It was the chilling reality for those who survived the witch trials in colonial America. This era reminds us of the profound and long-lasting consequences of mass hysteria and injustice, proving that, for millennia, collective delusion can unravel the very fabric of society, leaving behind wounds that take generations to heal, leaving us truly grateful for the principles of justice, human rights, and the continuous effort to learn from history's darkest chapters that define our lives today. So, as you slowly drift deeper into the quiet stillness of your night, consider the unsettling reality beyond the pyre. Your ancient ancestor, living in the aftermath of the witch trials, would have witnessed seized property and shifting power dynamics, with deep community scars lingering from broken trusts and moral compromises. It's a powerful reminder that while we cherish societal harmony and justice today, for centuries, countless communities were defined by lasting trauma and the slow, painful process of reckoning with past horrors, leaving us truly grateful for the resilience of the human spirit and the ongoing pursuit of reconciliation that define our lives today. Far from the challenging, unromanticized reality of colonial witch hunts, let's gently return to that scarred colonial landscape, where the profound and often invisible community's scars lingered long beyond the pyre, shaping the redistribution of property and the dynamics of power. If we've just explored the immediate and lasting consequences of the witch trials on individuals, families, and communities, tonight we'll conclude our journey by reflecting on the enduring impact of these horrific events on our collective consciousness. Echoes of fear, lessons, legacy, and lingering suspicions. You might think of the witch trials as a distant, isolated historical anomaly. But for your contemporary self, the chilling echoes of fear from that era still reverberate, offering crucial lessons about human nature and justice, leaving a powerful and undeniable legacy that continues to dispel lingering suspicions about the fragility of truth and the dangers of unchecked paranoia. Imagine yourself, now, in the 21st century, perhaps walking through the quiet, solemn memorials in Salem, Massachusetts, or visiting a museum exhibit on colonial history. You see the names of the accused, the dates of their trials and executions. The air is still, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint echoes of fear that once gripped those communities. The story of the witch trials is not just a chapter in a history book. It's a powerful and disturbing narrative that continues to offer vital lessons about justice, human rights, and the terrifying consequences of mass hysteria. It has left an undeniable legacy on our legal system and our understanding of social psychology, forcing us to confront the origins of lingering suspicions about authority and collective delusion. It's like looking at an ancient earthquake fault line. Even though the ground is calm now, you can still see the evidence of the immense forces that once tore it apart, a constant reminder of the potential for future tremors. The most profound legacy of the witch trials in colonial America, particularly the events in Salem, is their role as a cautionary tale within the American legal and cultural consciousness. These events are consistently invoked when discussing the dangers of religious extremism, mob mentality, the violation of civil liberties, and the presumption of guilt. The phrase witch hunt itself has entered our lexicon as a metaphor for any baseless persecution or politically motivated attack on an innocent group. This enduring resonance means the echoes of fear from 1692 are far from silent. They serve as a constant reminder of what can happen when justice is abandoned for paranoia. The immediate aftermath of the trials saw a gradual shift away from the fervent belief that had fueled them. Prominent figures, including some who had initially supported the trials, began to express doubt and regret. Judge Samuel Sewall publicly apologized for his role in the convictions, a crucial callback to the shifts in power discussed in Chapter 9. The Massachusetts General Court eventually annulled the convictions of many of the accused and offered restitution to their families, a small but significant step towards acknowledging the monumental injustice. These acts of atonement, however partial, began the slow process of healing the community's scars. A common historical truth is that the colonial American witch trials, particularly the Salem events, serve as a foundational cautionary tale in American legal and cultural history, leading to later reforms in legal procedures that emphasized tangible evidence and protected against coerced confessions, thereby shaping principles of due process and civil liberties that are central to modern American jurisprudence. Historians still widely debate the extent to which specific legal reforms directly resulted from the witch trials versus being part of a broader evolution of legal thought in the Anglo-American world, and how completely the fear of supernatural malevolence truly vanished from popular belief after the trials subsided. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about these echoes of fear and the crucial lessons learned is the subtle, yet profound, shift in the concept of religious and legal authority. As the trial's excesses gradually led to a greater separation of church and state in later colonial laws and fostered a deeper distrust of unchecked governmental and ecclesiastical power, fundamentally shaping the American pursuit of individual liberties. Imagine a society where ministers held immense sway, and their interpretations of biblical passages could literally condemn you to death, a stark contrast to the imperial doctors of ancient China, who wielded immense influence over the emperor's health in Chapter 9, but in a very different context. The witch trials exposed the terrifying dangers of allowing religious zeal to override legal principles. This harrowing experience became a powerful lesson that contributed to the later development of enshrined protections against religious persecution and the importance of secular judicial processes. It's like watching a building collapse due to faulty design, and then rebuilding it with entirely new, stronger architectural principles to ensure it never happens again. The lessons learned from the witch trials are multifold and continue to be relevant. We learned about the dangers of mass hysteria and groupthink, the rapid spread of accusations, fueled by communal fear and social pressure, demonstrates how easily rationality can be abandoned when a population is consumed by panic. It highlights the human tendency to conform to group beliefs, even when those beliefs are demonstrably false. The perversion of justice. The trials showcased how a legal system, ostensibly designed to maintain order, can become an instrument of terror when due process is abandoned. The reliance on spectral sightings, Chapter 6, coerced confessions, Chapter 5, and pseudoscientific tests. Chapter 3 created a system where innocence was impossible to prove. The vulnerability of the marginalized. The majority of those accused were often women who were already on the fringes of society, the elderly, the poor, the outspoken, or those without strong male protectors, a grim echo of the female troubles of Chapter 7. This serves as a stark reminder of how prejudice and societal biases can make certain groups particularly vulnerable during times of crisis. The importance of skepticism and critical thinking. The eventual end of the trials came when key figures began to question the validity of the evidence, particularly spectral testimony. This underscores the vital role of skepticism, empirical observation, and reasoned inquiry in challenging prevailing narratives. Even in the face of overwhelming emotional pressure, the legacy of the witch trials is not just a dark stain on American history. It's also a powerful catalyst for introspection and reform. It spurred a greater emphasis on factual evidence in legal proceedings, a move away from torture or coerced confessions, and a recognition of the presumption of innocence. These principles, while imperfectly applied, are foundational to modern Western jurisprudence. Even today, you can find lingering suspicions and debates about the trials. Were some accusers genuinely afflicted by psychosomatic illness? Were others outright malicious in their fabrications? What was the long-term genetic or psychological impact on the descendants of both the accused and the accusers? These questions continue to fascinate and challenge historians and psychologists, ensuring that the legacy of this period remains alive in academic discourse and popular culture. It truly sucked that such profound suffering was necessary for humanity to learn these vital lessons. So, while the echoes of fear from the witch trials still reverberate, they also carry crucial lessons and a powerful legacy that helped shape our modern understanding of justice and wellness, continuously dispelling lingering suspicions about the dark corners of human nature. This era reminds us of the enduring power of historical truth to illuminate the present, proving that for millennia, humanity's errors have provided invaluable guides for future progress, leaving us truly grateful for the ethical, evidence-based, and compassionate systems of justice and healthcare that define our lives today. So, as the turbulent currents of these historical nightmares gently recede, and the distant echoes of their terrifying practices softly fade into the quiet hum of your room, let your thoughts settle. Allow the intricate details of ancient echoes, where their wisdom continues to provide crucial lessons and stands as a powerful, lasting tribute to their enduring contributions to wellness, to drift softly from your mind. There's no rush, nowhere to be but here, in this peaceful moment. The fascinating realities of their lives, from the whispers of fear to the gallows shadow, remind us of a rich, complex past, a profound tapestry of human ingenuity and resilience. Its story is a powerful reminder that progress, while often celebrated, always carries a human legacy, and that the foundations of our modern understanding of justice, human rights, and the importance of critical thinking are built upon the sacrifices and insights of countless individuals whose enduring wisdom resonates through time, urging us to remember, to learn, and to always strive for a more comprehensive and compassionate approach to human dignity. Just relax and let sleep softly claim you, knowing that the turbulent waters of the past have calmed, leaving you in the comforting quiet of the present, where the only adventure you need now is the one waiting for you in your dreams.